Welcome, and thank you for standing in class. This time, all lines are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. I'd also like to inform parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn today's to Ms. Carol Hamilton. Thank you, ma'am. You may begin.
Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Carol Hamilton. I am the Executive Director of the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel at NASA. So welcome to Part 2 of the second quarterly of 2020 public meeting. Members of the public have been invited to make verbal presentations on safety or supply written comments to be sent within 2 weeks before this event. We have not received any. That being the case, there will be a brief time after the meeting if you want to make a comment on the meeting. There will not be time for questions, or we will not be accepting questions, but you can make a comment at that time. I'd like to now turn the meeting over to the ASAP Chair, Dr. Patricia Sanders. Dr. Sanders?
Thank you, Carol. Before starting in on our observations, I do want to take a minute to thank Carol Hamilton and Lisa Hackley for their support in arranging the multiple virtual insight meetings and discussions that have constituted the panel's second quarterly meeting of 2020. It has been a microcosm of the difficulties that NASA itself faces in sustaining its mission during a challenging time, and brings an appreciation of the efforts all are making. As noted at the first part of this public meeting discussion a couple weeks ago, we were not able to complete our engagements with all the NASA programs on the earlier planned schedule. The Insight meetings have stretched out over the course of several weeks instead of a few days. So today we intend to complete the discussion of our assessments and advice. A major area that was deferred to the second reporting is the commercial crew program. It has been an especially dynamic period of time for both arms of that program, and I will first call on Mr. Paul Hill to speak to the panel's view of the status of the SpaceX component. Paul?
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. So, as everybody on this call, I'm sure is well aware, the Demo 2 and the first crew launched on a commercial spacecraft schedule on May 7th. This is obviously a very focused time for NASA and SpaceX. As just one qualitative indicator of where they are in the process with preparing for this launch, the panel noted that the various risk and hazard reporting lists that are reported to us quarterly, and of course the respective engineering for each issue on those lists, they have all converged, reflecting the larger team's confidence in resolving issues, closing up the work, and being ready to fly. At the time of our review last week, the remaining program level issues were scheduled for final board review through this week. The commercial crew program is tracking a list of open work that must be closed before committing to launch, which is not unlike any space launch. While this is still difficult work and engineering decisions must be made with due diligence, flight readiness reviews and launch processing are very familiar steps in the process for both NASA and SpaceX, and by all appearances they are marching deliberately through their normal process. Late-stage operational readiness looks familiar as well. The usual range of final flight rules, mission plans, crew and flight controller training, we're all in work through this week. The JSC Flight Operations Directorate submitted a list of exceptions to their certification of flight readiness, which is essentially issues or concerns that require formal review or action before flight. These are all related to flight hardware concerns and are also all scheduled to be reviewed by a program level board through this week. This is in no way unprecedented, and the critical point here is less about the specific issues in those exceptions and more about the fact that the program is tracking through the exceptions, review closure to them at open forums, and they will all be reviewed separately as part of the agency FRR before committing to launch. The panel also heard a summary of the Falcon 9 engine shutdown anomalies during March 18th SpaceX launch, although this was not on a NASA mission. The fault tree analysis points towards probable cause, with ongoing work to confirm that probable cause. Because of system processing differences for this flight, the Demo 2 engines are not considered to be a risk for this probable cause, and the program's continuing to follow SpaceX's work on this issue and elevate it if there's any impact or change to their Demo 2 flight rationale. Finally, at least for Demo 2 prep, SpaceX has added a third supported landing site as a way to increase landing site availability and improve launch probability. And it takes sea state, air and surface support, and trauma center locations into account, and is certainly another great step. In summary for Demo 2, it's been a complex journey for SpaceX to get this mission to this level of readiness, and they are to be commended for their efforts and success to date. As already pointed out, NASA and SpaceX are very familiar with and have strong track records in final flight readiness and launch processing where they now find themselves. However, as Dr. Sanders reminded NASA in our meeting, now is the time to be on alert for go fever. So much work has gone into being this close to a launch. It can be difficult to resist the pressure to accept some risk or trivialize some concern with less rigor in the decision making. As NASA well knows, that's compounded by Demo 2, or it's compounding for Demo 2 with the additional pressure not just to launch the first commercial crew, but also to build the station crew back up to a complement 6, to relieve the constraint against US OS EDA capability, and to resume full ISS utilization, as we discussed in our April meeting. The panel urges the agency to do what it certainly appeared to be doing: follow their proven FRR process and ensure they deliberately close every engineering issue and risk acceptance. As Program Manager Kathy Leaders told the panel just last week, we're not going to rush, and we'll launch when we're ready. Finally, for the Crew 1 mission, Commercial Crew Program reported to us that all hardware and software processing are on track for review in June for SpaceX's Crew 1 mission sometime after Demo 2. The Crew 1 crew training schedule has been impacted by COVID-19, as you might expect, largely due to the various social distancing complications. SpaceX has taken steps to increase distancing from the crew during training, including offering special housing in California and increasing remote training capability. And SpaceX and the JSC Flight Operations Directorate have won training plan revisions and are evaluating other changes that will make sure the crew is ready to fly as soon as is reasonably possible after Demo 2. We'll see more concrete details on the Crew 1 launch processing after Demo 2's post-flight reviews. And that's everything I have on SpaceX.
Thank you, Paul. Well said. Next, General Susan Helms will address the Boeing component.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. Since our first quarterly meeting of 2020 back in February, a number of notable events related to the Boeing aspect of the CCP program have taken place. First of all, the joint NASA-Boeing independent review team has completed its investigation of the anomalies that occurred during the flight of OFT-1 back in December. Second, as a result of that investigation, a number of action plans have been developed for forward work to address the recommendations of the investigation. Third, because of the issues discovered during the conduct of OFT-1, Boeing has decided to perform a reflight of OFT-1. And then finally, the Commercial Crew Program team has developed some additional actions to be implemented by NASA in response to the findings of the IPT. And I would like to address each of these in turn. As we discussed in February, while much was productively accomplished during the December flight test, the mission of the Starliner was significantly truncated due to software-related in-flight anomalies, ultimately determined to be a coding error related to the mission elapsed timer. During on-orbit troubleshooting, a second Starliner flight anomaly related to the service module disposal was detected, but was successfully corrected prior to deorbit. In addition, there were notable issues with communication between the mission control teams and the Starliner, creating difficulties in sending commands to the space vehicle. Although the Starliner was successfully recovered and much was learned, a joint NASA-Boeing independent review team was established to pursue root cause of these significant anomalies and determine the necessary corrective actions. The team has now concluded its investigations, and a total of 16 recommended actions were reported out to NASA leadership. 19 additional recommended actions were later added based on Boeing's broader review beyond the two software anomalies. The assessments behind these recommendations were deeply comprehensive and included autopsies of software design, functional fault testing, hardware and software interface testing, independent software validation and verification, environmental compatibility testing, peer reviews, and the underlying requirements. At every step, the team identified not only the root cause of the problems that were encountered, but also when those problems could or should have been discovered during testing and other systems engineering processes. As a result, the top priority corrective actions outlined by the joint IRT go far beyond a software fix or procedural change and significantly improve the overall systems engineering and integration principles used in the Boeing development lifecycle. The corrective actions have been grouped with numerous action plans, and a process has been established to attain closure on all of the recommendations of the joint IRT. NASA will have significant insight on intermediate milestones toward closure and will have significant participation in the closure processes. In addition, the identified action plans have integrated into the program operating rhythm to ensure that recommended actions taken are mapped to the development cycle of the flight software for CFT-1, the first crewed flight. Unambiguously, Boeing has stated that a reflight of OFT-1, now called OFT-2, will occur, and the panel applauds this decision as a best approach from a safety perspective. Although not yet scheduled, the flight is likely to occur later this year. Currently, the Atlas V rocket, intended for use for the CFT flight, will now be repurposed for the OFT-2 flight. Both the crew module and the service module of OFT-2 are in final assembly, although certainly the corrective actions required by the joint IRT will likely have some impact on when and how qual and integration testing is likely to occur, both for OFT-2 and CFT-1. In response to the Joint IRT investigation and action plan, the NASA Commercial Crew Office has also initiated a series of actions intended to strengthen the oversight of the Boeing program. For example, the CCP program will now review hazards related to system and subsystem interfaces to ensure that they are well-defined, well-controlled, and properly verified. Excuse me. The program will also expand oversight through additional audits of Boeing software integration, validation, and verification testing. And in addition of NASA software personnel with a Boeing focus. The CCP team has also made substantive changes in their Boeing software certification strategy to improve and strengthen oversight. In summary, the actions taken by the CCP personnel are complementary to the actions taken by the Boeing team to ensure that sound systems engineering and integration principles are supported in software development and in its integration with the hardware. All of the actions taken to date, by both Boeing and NASA, are highly synchronous with the ASAP recommendations made during our February quarterly meeting to fully explore the systems engineering and integration, testing, and verification processes leading up to the in-flight anomaly. And that is the conclusion of my reporting, Dr. Sanders, on the Boeing side of the CCP story right now.
Thank you, Susan. And I will reiterate what she said, that while OFT-2 is certainly welcomed, it is not sufficient. The other actions that have been identified are critical to moving forward, and we look forward to those being completed as well. Dr. George Niels will shortly be discussing our understanding of the status of the program to develop a human landing system for lunar exploration. This program has much to learn from the experience of the Commercial Crew Program, and George will touch on that. But in a broader sense, the panel strongly encourages NASA to thoughtfully consider their role going forward with complex space developments. It is critical for both safety and mission assurance that the right balance be struck between serving as an exacting overseer, a development partner, and a demanding customer of a service. A lot of that balance has developed, sometimes painfully, over the course of the Commercial Crew Program. We urge NASA not to relearn these difficult lessons, but to go forward with an awareness of what is the best application of both NASA's deep experience and knowledge and the best of what the commercial sector could bring to the table. A significant observation of the panel concerning the Commercial Crew Program is that it became necessary for NASA to substantially intervene in some way to assist both providers, both one using a traditional systems engineering and integration approach and one with a less traditional approach. We make this observation with the recognition that NASA continues to have deep expertise that should continue to be employed for the success of the nation's most complex and challenging space system developments and execution. We have seen that the greater involvement of the commercial industry can bring innovative designs and fresh approaches to the table. We have also seen that NASA's long-standing experience remains valuable to the process. In addition to specialized materials, engineering, and test capabilities that NASA can bring to bear, the panel is particularly aware of the systems engineering and integration challenges that face both providers and were aided by the NASA involvement. Independent of when and how NASA engages and the specific level of insight and oversight that is provided, it is most effective if the ground rules are understood by all parties early in the program. In considering the safety implications of NASA's relationship with suppliers, vendors, contractors, we call particular attention to understanding and defining the distinction between we and they, both in communication and in execution. If the distinction is blurred, unintentional risks may be incurred. For example, NASA may unintentionally imply that the agency is taking responsibility and/or action in solving an engineering problem or managing risk when it is the contractor that remains responsible and should act. Clarifying the role that NASA intends for the long term is also important for strategic workforce planning. Without understanding that role, the agency could erode experience and expertise in conducting research, development, launch and flight operations to private companies who may or may not be available or able to conduct future exploration-related flight operations. Thoughtful attention to defining the key skills NASA needs to retain may prove important to the nation's overall space objectives in the future. There are points that can be made that in a collaborative team or partnered environment, the distinction between we versus they is irrelevant, and we offer these comments without intention to be critical or unsupportive of what NASA is doing. But we encourage transparency and deliberate and open identification of goals and discussion of management risks. We will be discussing these aspects with NASA leadership in more detail going forward. I will now turn this discussion over to Dr. Neal to speak specifically about the human landing system.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. NASA is partnering with the commercial space industry to accomplish its goal of landing the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024 as part of the Artemis program. A key component of the program is the vehicle that will take the astronauts on the last leg of that journey, a system that NASA refers to as the Human Landing System. On April 30th, NASA announced the selection of 3 companies to design and develop that system: Blue Origin, Dynetics, and SpaceX. The awards were for firm fixed price, milestone-based contracts for a 10-month base period that runs from May 2020 through February 2021. The combined value for all 3 of the contracts is $967 million. I'd like to briefly describe each of the selected approaches and then discuss some of the ASAP's observations on the program to date. Blue Origin is leading what they refer to as a Human Landing System national team, consisting of Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper. The national team will develop an Integrated Lander Vehicle, or ILV, that has 3 stages. Lockheed Martin is responsible for the ascent stage, which includes the crew cabin, and which has significant commonality with Orion. Blue Origin is building the descent stage. Northrop Grumman will handle the transfer stage, which is largely based on its Cygnus cargo module. And Draper will focus on the guidance, navigation, and control, avionics, and software. The ILD is designed to be launched on Blue Origin's New Glenn and United Launch Alliance's Vulcan, and it will be able to dock with either Orion or the Gateway to await the arrival of the crew. A key attribute of the national team proposal is the significant amount of proven spaceflight heritage, given the linkages to Orion and Cygnus. The contract value for the base period is $579 million. Dynetics is leading a large team with more than 25 subcontractors. Their system, known as the Dynetics Landing System, is basically equivalent to a two-stage system. It uses a single element for both ascent and descent, but there are also multiple modular propellant vehicles, or MPVs, that are used to fuel the engines at various points in the mission and are then discarded like drop tanks. The crew cabin sits very close to the lunar surface, which should make it easier for the astronauts to enter and exit the vehicle and to offload supplies and experiments. The system is launch vehicle agnostic, and it can be carried on a number of commercial rockets. It can also dock with either Orion or the Gateway. The Dynetics contract value for the base period is $253 million. The SpaceX proposal is based on extensive use of the Starship. There are actually 3 different Starship variants that will be used: the tanker Starship, the propellant storage Starship, and the human landing system Starship, each of which will be carried to low Earth orbit by the Super Heavy booster. Once the HLS Starship is in low Earth orbit and has been fully fueled, the landing system is used as a large single stage that flies all the way to lunar orbit, down to the surface to land, and then back to lunar orbit. It is an extremely large vehicle, 50 meters tall and 9 meters in diameter, and it has 2 airlocks. The entire system is fully reusable, and it can dock with either Orion or the Gateway. The SpaceX contract value for the base period is $135 million. So, those are the 3 systems. NASA plans to embed its teams with the companies to provide advice and to keep close tabs on the progress, an approach that may be challenging given the impacts of the coronavirus. But the companies are responsible for the designs. The goal is for the companies to be at a PDR, preliminary design review level, by the end of the base period. At that point, NASA would like to have finalized the requirements, the trade studies that will be done, the certification plans, and the number and kinds of flight tests that will be accomplished. Going forward, NASA will have lots of choices. It can select either 1 or 2 companies to proceed toward initial demonstrations beginning in 2024 as part of Option A. It can also select either 1 or 2 companies for sustainability demonstration missions as part of Option B. Depending on the progress made, NASA could also choose to develop a landed services contract solicitation as early as 2027. As ASAP tries to wrap its arms around what NASA has done so far and where it is heading with respect to the HLS program, we can offer some observations. The approach that NASA is using with industry, with a broad agency announcement, firm fixed price contracts, and a lot of things happening in parallel, has allowed NASA to move extremely fast. The progress that has been made to date, both on the technical design work and from the procurement perspective, is just stunning. it will clearly be challenging to make the 2024 goal, but so far, it looks like NASA is doing everything it can in terms of strategic planning, programmatic decisions, and contract actions to keep things on track. Also, looking at the 3 teams that have been selected, NASA will be able to benefit from a tremendous amount of innovation, creativity, and diversity of design, with 1, 2, and 3-stage landing systems, different concepts of operations, different kinds of propellants, big companies and small companies, and both traditional aerospace contractors and entrepreneurial firms. So we will have a chance to see the companies challenge one another, both for safety and performance, and see what design approach works best, at least for this program. In our annual report for 2019, the ASAP identified a number of lessons learned from the commercial crew program that we hoped would be applied to future programs like HLS. Those lessons included clear and well-articulated performance-based requirements, a well-thought-out acquisition strategy, the benefits of competition, and early engagement with industry. It appears that those lessons have been embraced and incorporated. There are 2 lessons for which we don't yet have enough information to make a judgment, and they are, first, the importance of adequate and consistent funding, and secondly, defining and executing to a realistic schedule. We'll plan to continue to watch for those, especially given the possibility that Congress will end up passing a continuing resolution rather than regular and timely appropriations, and the significant impacts that the coronavirus may have, both on NASA and on the contractor community. That's all I had, Dr. Sanders.
Thank you, George. And let me expand on some of your comments. One of the lessons from commercial crew being early engagement with industry is pertinent to the base period with the HLS proposers. The goals that they hope to achieve during these initial 10 months will depend on that close interaction. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 restrictions will make it more challenging, at least initially, to engage effectively, but it will remain imperative to do so. Also, with 3 providers in the mix at this stage, NASA will have the need to ensure that they have the personnel resources, numbers, but more important, skill sets to meet that demand. George also mentioned the impact of timely appropriations. The ASAP has spoken of the risks of continuing resolutions multiple times, and our concerns definitely apply to the HLS development. Program managers must have the skills, obviously, to adjust to whatever level of appropriation is provided by the Congress. But the uncertainties accompanying CRs are especially difficult. Given the timing of the transition from the HLS base period to a follow-on phase, a CR would add risk to an already aggressive development. And third, while it wasn't explicit in the list of lessons learned that the ASAP identified in our 2019 report, an important lesson to be brought forward is the appropriate level of NASA's insight and oversight of the execution of SE&I principles and processes. Now I have some observations to add to the panel's comments addressing the Artemis program at part 1 of this quarterly meeting. At that time, much of our engagement with NASA on the future of the Artemis program dealt with newly emerging information and was premature for the panel to address. Since then, progress has been made and a path ahead is emerging. There have been a number of items contributing to that evolution. First was the arrival of the newly appointed Associate Administrator for HEO, Mr. Doug Lavero. His arrival brought the initiation of both a program status assessment by a group of respected independent professionals and an internal reconsideration of risk management across the program. Both efforts appear to be resulting in actions that the panel views as positive steps for safety and risk management. The program status assessment provided a number of key findings, many dealing with systems engineering, program organization, and schedule, all topics that the ASAP addressed from our perspective previously. The program status assessment findings are resulting in a number of actions that we believe tend in a direction that has the potential to better manage risk in an aggressive development program. These include establishment of an SE&I authority responsible for orchestrating end-to-end mission analysis for Artemis with clear feedback to the program, establishment of Artemis program managers for all phases and the necessary support structures, and in particular for HLS, ensuring appropriate management reserve for HLS to avoid future schedule erosion, focusing on requirements from the onset to preclude significant changes between PDR and CDR, and to the extent possible, limiting new technology development. The internal study looked holistically across the Artemis program with two significant results emerging. First, it recognized that there was a tension between the objective of Phase 1 of Artemis to reach the lunar surface with NASA astronauts by 2024, and the objective of Phase 2 to provide for sustained lunar operations leading to risk reduction for an eventual Mars exploration program in subsequent years. This led to a look at ways to decouple where possible the two efforts while recognizing that they are still two parts of a whole. Secondly, the study effort looked at risk mitigation across the first three Artemis launches that constitute Phase 1 as a continuum. It identified feasible adjustments to the mission profiles that would reduce or better manage risks, such as inclusion of a demonstration of the ability to conduct rendezvous proximity operations on Artemis 2 before the actual requirement for such on Artemis 3. Another example is the integration of gateway and the power propulsion element on the ground prior to launch rather than on orbit, thus simplifying and mitigating risk, and taking gateway off the critical path for Artemis 3, and therefore maximizing its development for sustainment operations, more critical to Phase 2. I repeat that the panel views these as promising actions. We still believe that the schedule for Phase 1 remains aggressive and will continue to caution against taking or making decisions towards that end of achieving that schedule that lead to unwarranted impacts on safety and mission assurance. But taking prudent risk mitigation steps is a move we can support. In closing and looking forward, the panel has repeatedly expressed its concern with the significant and growing risk of micrometeoroids and orbital debris. We plan to have serious discussions on this topic at our next quarterly meeting and intervening insight engagements. The recognition of this threat seems to be increasing, but we are not encouraged by the lack of action being taken to address a serious safety hazard, and you can expect us to speak further on this topic when we next meet. And that concludes our comments at this part 2 of the quarterly meeting. Carol?
Okay, Ashley, at this time we'd like to open the line up for any comments from our listeners.
We will now begin comments. If you would like to make a comment, please press star 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Again, if you would like to make a comment, please press star 1. One moment, please, for your first.
After the tone, please state your name and company, followed by the pound sign.
Anthony Intravia, private.
Thank you.
I do stay queued up for a comment. Just one moment. Your first comment comes from Anthony. Your line is open.
Okay, I'd like to thank the panel. It was a very good discussion. My comment is, in particular for the lander, I think the PDR is a bit aggressive for at least the performance period. You might want to go a little bit back to the SRR or SDR to make sure that the system design is what is going to go forward. It's going to be an aggressive schedule, but if NASA wants to do that, and I think the other thing they'll bring up is that the demo concept, or the flight concepts for the commercial crew, did not have the benefit of the PDR, CDR, and that kind of activity with NASA. At least I didn't see it, or it wasn't available to the public.